Hello and welcome to The Ramp. The Ramp is a podcast by Ambi. I'm Tor, the host. I'm CEO and co-founder of Ambi. In this podcast, we'll be meeting industry-leading people that share some very, very interesting thoughts on growing a company. And today, we're super lucky. We have Jessica Zwaan with us. Jessica is one of those people that have really inspired me on how to build an operation and organization. She's launched some really, really interesting thoughts around building people as a product. And she's coming out with a book very, very soon. So hello, Jessica. Really nice to have you on the ramp.
Hello. Lovely to be here. I'm very excited about having a chat with you today.
Fantastic. So maybe you can give a brief introduction. You're COO over at Whereby, just a brief introduction to Whereby, what the company is doing, and then we'll jump into some people stuff.
Yeah, great. So Whereby is a video communications platform. We have a B2C product, very similar to kind of a Zoom. Our whole pitch is that we're very beautiful and easy to use, and we are very proudly also a Scandinavian business, which is obviously one of the reasons that we know each other so well.
Go Norway. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. No, but I've used the product for several years. It's a fantastic product and really, really cool company. So what's the size of the business now?
We're about 70 people at the moment.
And you're global, right?
We are fully distributed. We're all over the world, from India to Chile to I'm here in New York City, and then obviously our headquarters is in Norway.
Cool. Good. No, but let's jump to today's topic, which is people as a product. So it would be great, Jessica, if you could give us a quick intro and a crash course in people as a product and what it is and how it operates.
Yeah, absolutely. So people operations as a product is something that it's kind of the philosophy by which I build people teams, obviously, but I also try to use the same philosophy for operations teams and just generally business operations. A philosophy that every business has three products. You have your product you're selling to your customers, which is recruitment services. It's a video communications platform, whatever it is that your customers are buying off you. You also have an investment product. And then finally, you have your culture and your ways of working, which is a product that you are selling to your current, future, and to some degree past employees as well. That basically, in my opinion, is the product that you're constantly building and iterating on in the people team. It is analogized best, in my opinion, as a subscription product. So you are subscribing to a business when you first join, once you signed your contract, and then every single month you are consciously or subconsciously making a decision to continue that subscription. At one point, you decide, I no longer want to have this subscription, you resign, and that is when your time with the business ends. And using that analogy, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in more detail, that is how I like to build my people teams, to really try and figure out how that they can strategically align and then optimize that product so that it best supports primarily the financial instrument, which really is like the kind of headline product that every business is building, if I'm frank.
No, I think it's a really, really cool concept. And I've been working with people in operations and in the talent function for several years. I think it's viewed very much, unfortunately, as more of a support hygiene part of the business. Of course, not everybody looks at it that way. But I think this is more visionary. It's more value adding. It's putting the operations side by side with revenue generating activities and functions, which is fantastic. And thinking about the employees as stakeholders that subscribe is just it was an aha moment for me looking at how you guys operate over at Whereby. So was there any sort of specific moment in time that you had that aha moment, or where did you get the inspiration for people operations as a product?
So it's something that I've been consciously and with the wording of products doing for the last 3 to 4 years. I think the idea kind of came to me over the course of many years gradually. Right? I started with very traditional HR background. I worked at BHP Billiton and Goldman Sachs, very traditional kind of HR functions. And over the course of years, I kind of experienced a lot of different ways of doing HR, basically. I went more into kind of big tech. I worked at Box for a while, very very of its time, kind of early, mid 20 teens HR, very like snack walls and bean bags type vibes. So I've kind of seen, this whole like transition happen over the course of the last like 15 years of my career. And I had this moment where I was already using the thinking of product management. So really, I do get very inspired by the work that other functions do. I've always been very curious about, how to design come up with these huge pieces of work that they do through like design thinking and retrospectives, and how does the marketing team use metrics in such detailed ways to kind of drive performance, and really trying to think about what we can learn from other functions. And then I did a piece of consulting work for a company called Owlo, which has now been acquired, where the team was small and built in such a way that I really had to use product management kind of vernacular and wording in order for them to understand what I was talking about. And at that point, I had a conversation with the CEO and COO, and they said, this has kind of been a really big eye opener for us about how effective a people team can be and an operations team can be. You should like write about it. So I was like, okay, great. So I think like 3 or 4 years ago, I wrote this blog called People Operations as a Product or something like that. And people seem to really enjoy it. And then it's turned into a book, and a bunch of other companies are now using this way of working. And it's just really been, I think, very, very well received and taken on board by others, and kind of built upon now.
Built for People. Your book is coming soon, right? So when is the launch date?
It is the 7th of May in the UK and the 21st of May in the US. So next month, everyone's orders will get shipped, which is exciting.
Exciting. Go buy it. Go pre-order it. Oh, that's cool. Cool. Okay, so let's think that there's an HR professional here listening to this podcast, and they're working in more traditional company and HR function. How do they make that transition? How do they sort of come to work the next day and say, hey, I have an idea, let's plug and play? Where did they start?
So you've described somebody that's already in a pre-existing role with probably a pre-existing team, which is like the hardest sell or the hardest transition to make, right? I think there's 2 realities. There's one in which things aren't working very well. Like something's not going well in the HR team. Either you've got lots of churn or you're not really proving that it's particularly effective, whatever that may be. That's a much easier place to come from. You can build like a business case saying, something needs to change. We need to see these things improve. Here's my idea. This is a couple of other companies that have done this. And you can point towards businesses that have started applying this people operations as a product methodology. And there are lots on LinkedIn. If you look at my LinkedIn feed, I usually try to share and repost other people that are kind of atting me in the work that they're doing. But if you're in a business where maybe you don't have a lot of data about how effective you're being, maybe it is very kind of business as usual, kind of support operations type pieces of HR work, this is actually a harder sell, right? Because if it's not broke, don't fix it tends to be the way that I think a lot of leaders think about HR. And I think for me, one of the things that I've found really helpful in the advice I've given to other more traditional HR leaders when they've asked me this question is identifying the fact that HR is basically the gatekeeper of about 60% of your company's spend every month, headcount, right? That is, not every company is 60%. That's like a SaaS metric. It's usually like a 60-40 split between. But whatever it is, I can guarantee it's pretty much always going to be the majority of your monthly spend every month goes into headcount and the associated costs with headcount, so the HR budget, right? That responsibility is huge, and it's a huge investment to be responsible for. It's also an investment that a lot of businesses just, in my opinion, really aren't leveraging in a way that they probably could be. And I think taking the power of that and going back to your C-suite or your manager and saying, I've been put in charge of 60% of our spend month on month, plus an extra 10% in all of the OpEx that goes into running the HR team. That's a huge investment. I believe we can optimize this to make our spend have higher impacts on us in a commercial reality, and also to be able to be a more effective and strategic business. But I need you to allow me to make this shift into this way of thinking. And then from that point, what you're basically doing is turning yourself into the first thing I talked about, which is a company with a problem. I don't think we're optimizing this well enough. And then you can talk from that place.
It's a very good good way of approaching it. Do you think there's a specific sweet spot where, in terms of a phase, where a company should look at people operations as a product, or does that work for a company of 10 people, or is it more applicable when the company grows to 100, or do you see any limitations there?
I think this is a really fair question. And it's something that I get asked a bit as well, because there's a very big difference between the philosophy of thinking this way and the operationalizing of how I talk about what to do, right? So in the book I've written, I spend quite a bit of time in the book talking about just the philosophy. So thinking about the analogy between all the different stages of the employee life cycle and where it exists within product management, right? So talking about like recruitment marketing being very similar to top of funnel marketing, onboarding very similar to product onboarding, promotions being very similar to like net revenue expansion, those kinds of bits and pieces, right? And that philosophy, I think you can take that philosophy on board no matter what size your company is, whether your company is 20,000 people or one person, right? Because it's really about how you think about a function and how you incentivize performance within that function. The operations is kind of the second half of what I wrote the book about, which is really about like, okay, great, you've got this philosophy. What can you learn operationally from the product team when it comes to how you organizationally set up your people team? Like, what are their roles? What are they responsible for? How do they functionally work together? How do you work together on a kind of cadence basis? My suggestion is you work in sprints and you have retrospectives and you set goals and your goals are output focused. And this piece of work is much more size dependent in some ways, right? Like, you're not going to be able to set up a team in squads if you have 3 members of a HR team because you don't even have enough for half a squad, right? So that's where you need to figure out like what is appropriate for us, what isn't appropriate for us, and like what is appropriate for us now, what's appropriate for us in the future, and how do I kind of get towards that point is really helpful. If you're a team of 10,000 people that's currently set up in a shared services model, I think it's going to be a long process, and that it's fair enough, because it should be, between where you are today and if you would like to get into working into a squad model in a HR context, like I talk about in my book. It will be a process, right? But if you are a team of 20 HR folks that are already working with a business partner model, already integrated with the teams, it actually might only take you 2 months to get into that state. So yeah, basically the answer to that question is like, I think it depends on where you're at. Like, I don't think there are any barriers philosophically speaking. I think there are always going to be barriers operationally speaking, because operations are tricky.
And I was also curious about how do you sort of build the backlog? Because for us, we hired, 60 people or something last year. So it was a massive ramp up. And now we have people obviously in the people team, and setting those priorities and understanding what's important at which point in time is tricky exercise, right? Because for example, sales and marketing, it's driving revenue. For operations, I think you can look at anything from fixing, maybe hiring is broken, you need to fix that. Maybe you have trouble with retention, you need to look at that. And also maybe learning and development or benefits. It can be any type of, you can go in any direction, right? So when you then build that backlog, is it looking at what's most broken, or is it what's most connected to the strategic direction of the company? I'll stop babbling. Looking forward to hearing your answer to this.
I think the answer is kind of a mix of both things. Like when you're building the product, right? Like you're always trying to balance what is the kind of direction, our vision of our product? Where are we trying to take it to? Oh no, there's a bug that means this button is broken and we have to fix this next quarter, otherwise we're going to lose revenue, right? Like, there's always this constant push and pull between the things that we need to do to make the product operational now and the things that we need to do to make the product operational and effective and aspirational in a year's time, right? The way that I like to figure out what of those two things to prioritize is very similar to, I think exactly the same as how a product team does it. Again, this comes down to the operationalizing part of the team. So I'm going to talk about like ideal circumstances of how I think people teams should be built within this philosophy. So I like to build my teams where everyone is a people partner of some description. We don't have talent partners, HR partners, blah, blah, blah. I think there is a tipping point where that does change when you're at like maybe 2,000 people or something like that, when your attrition percentage becomes high enough that you know you're always going to require recruitment headcount. Otherwise, I'm a huge advocate, as you know, for services like Airbnb. I think that they're an excellent way to plug into your people squads. Yeah, love you too. I really do believe that your people roles should be kind of T-shaped, right? So you can have a people team member who is effectively doing all of the work within a squad that maybe has a deep level of expertise in learning and development. That doesn't mean that they are a learning and development manager. They are a people partner. They still need to be working with people directly. They still need to be advocating for the team that they're working for. They still need to be an advisor on several different things. But if someone in the team comes and says, hey, I have this manager that's got this question about this piece of work that we're building specifically around learning, they are the person that you'd go to, and they're the ones that they would put their hands up to help out with that project, right? So what I like to do is I build a squad of people partners, ideally kind of 5 to 6 of them, and their role is to solve a problem statement every quarter. So to identify a problem statement within our roadmap, something like we see far too many drop-offs at probation compared to our recruitment feedback should suggest. So if your recruitment feedback's all really strong and then people are failing probation, something's going wrong between probation and recruitment, right? It's a problem statement. And then in that squad, you would have these different people partners working on the different parts of that project. So maybe one of them is a people partner that has a deep expertise in reward, and they may go out and say like, well, maybe I need to do a bit of a check on like whether the compensation strategy is quite right for what we're reaching out to. Another person's really like very experienced in recruitment and talent, and they say, I'm going to focus on our interview process and see what's not going right between interviewing and probation. Somebody else's background much more in the kind of people operations legalities. They can write a probation policy which suits the business. So they're kind of working together to solve this problem in a kind of series of 1 to 2 projects that kind of interlink and require all of the heads together. And all of the people partners' roles are split between working directly with a team as an advisor, so acting as a people partner to a part of the business, and also doing this kind of building work. And I call the 2 halves of this human operations, which is the work that you need a human being to do. So sitting with the manager, getting feedback, talking about how something's happening, running interviews, if that's what's happening, like attending interviews, blah, blah, blah. And then the people operations work is the actual building of the products that you need to support the business. Now, the reason I say all of this, when you ask the question, particularly about prioritization, is I think it really helps highlight that there are 2 halves of the responsibility of a people team. One of them is gathering qualitative feedback throughout the quarter, really understanding the details about what is going wrong in the team, what are the areas of that are ripe for improvement, that are really causing people pain, because data can only tell you half the story in PeopleOps, as you know. Like data may tell us that things are failing between recruitment and probation because we see the numbers tell us that, but you really do get so much value out of the human being that's sitting in those recruitment interviews and saying, hey, I can tell you right now, the data's not going to tell you this, but the problem is because our managers don't understand how to run a good interview. We need to train them better. This problem is a training problem. It's not a probation policy problem. And that kind of qualitative feedback, what I like to do is get all of my team together at the end of every quarter. And I do this with all my teams, people, CSM, customer support, finance, everyone. We do a big retrospective and we talk about all of these kind of qualitative, really gnarly problems that we're seeing both in the data and then in our conversations. We put them all out in a series of problem statements and we really talk about like what's happened in the past quarter, about how we've tried to solve problems. Is it working? Is it not? What was effective? What wasn't? And then we have a second meeting where we decide what the priorities are going to be going forward based on a couple of different exercises depending on how we want to run the forward-looking goal planning. Sometimes it's a impact versus effort matrix. Sometimes it's simply looking at the data and having it kind of yell at us and saying, well, this looks like the obvious one. Let's like create a hypothesis. Sometimes it's an urgent and importance, like Eisenhower matrix. It really depends what we're talking about, but using these product management tools to make decisions so we can say, well, we know that the problem here is folks aren't being trained properly on recruitment, right? Like let's say that's what we drill down into. Not enough good managed training on recruitment. Well, there's actually a pre-existing problem to that, which we don't even have a learning and development tool. There's no way to train them. We just got a bunch of Notion docs. Someone goes, okay, well, we need to solve that problem first. It's a very operational problem. And then we've got this much more strategic problem, which is we need to have all of our managers aligned around what recruitment looks like, right? And that's how we kind of go down this path of prioritizing what needs to happen so that we can get to our strategy more long term.
If you were then I don't know, a smaller people team of 1 to 2 people. And then you have, as we've already talked about, operations is quite broad. You then build MVPs for all of these, I don't know, learning and development, performance reviews, and then you apply more of a lean startup approach to that, or do you build like solid stuff on in each area? You don't have time for that, I assume, but that would be interesting to to learn more about your thoughts there, where you have limited resources, and that's, I assume, quite relevant for companies these days.
Yeah, absolutely. This is also the thing that made me start working this way. Or one of the things was like how frustrated I would get working on these big projects in these small corporate environments where the HR team would work like in a cupboard, basically. No one would see the work that we did for a year. We'd be like, we're launching a new benefits program at the end of 2016. And they wouldn't talk to anyone about it. It was like very like behind closed doors. The only people that were being looped in were like finance and maybe management approval. And then you'd work on this thing for a full year. You'd develop a bunch of like PDFs that were getting sent out to people. No one ever read them. No one ever decided whether or not they were good beforehand. And then maybe it worked, maybe it didn't. And I was like, there's got to be a better way than us working for a year and then maybe shipping something that takes so long that might not even be effective. And obviously that's where product management talks about, like, we should be shipping things in an iterative stages, not ship the minimum viable product of whatever it is you're shipping to try and learn. The other thing that's really helpful is using user research, using dog fooding. So I always try to dog food everything through my people team first. If we're doing training, then my people team gets trained. And this is actually something that Jürgen, of course, from Ambi, Jürgen wrote all of our interview training and all of our diversity training. And the first people that went through and did it were the people team. The people team were a part of building that process, but then also all of us had to sit down and do Jürgen's training and give him feedback on what was working and what wasn't. And then we started shipping it out to the business. And we always try to do that process of like, let's dog food it, let's try and get feedback, let's do some user research, let's sit with managers. Instead of creating some big PDF policy, let's sit with them and say, like, do you understand what it says? Is this even helpful? Before we start shipping stuff out. And it's made a big difference in us because it's removed the requirement for everything the people team puts out to be absolutely perfect. Nobody expects everything for us to be this kind of like complete piece of work, and everything gets a lot of feedback from our team, which I think is fantastic. And it allows us to kind of abandon things that just aren't working. We ship something that people don't really get and they don't engage with, then we can just say like, okay, nobody really wanted that. So we can just close it down and we don't have to build upon it.
Yeah, makes sense. Looking at sort of the data that you can gather in a talent function or people function, it's like you can gather a lot of different data, quantitative, qualitative. What's sort of your go-to metrics for the people function?
So I think about the people team generally with 3 kind of North Star metrics, and I don't like to necessarily have these ones be like super interfacing with the team because I think it can feel a little impersonal. So I give them like a kind of jazzy title. I've got impact, growth, and talent, basically. So impact is directly associated with the return on investment that you get as an employee. The second one is around growth, which I like to look at as net revenue expansion or net revenue retention, depending on kind of what exactly it is you're looking at there, which is when we bring someone into our team, what is our propensity of growing them and making them become a more effective, more senior, more impactful member of our organization. And then the third one is talent, which I've already, I think, kind of mentioned, which is CAC to LTV ratio. So what is the cost of acquiring someone versus the value that they give to our organization long term? And our recruitment team should be thinking about obviously trying to improve the ratio between customer acquisition, or I guess employee acquisition and employee lifetime value by making sure that they're having, a high ROI and a high return on investment into business longer term. And then I try to put like all of our metrics underneath there, and they're very much dependent on like what the strategic initiatives are that we're trying to look at. With those as kind of like the headline or North Star metrics, you can really start playing around with things like kind of funnel optimization. So for example, what's the relationship between recruitment feedback versus probation feedback versus performance feedback every single quarter? Like, are we seeing that remains stable? Are there certain trends we see where, somebody gets to their second year and then all of a sudden their performance feedback starts dipping? Like, what's that funnel look like? How likely a strong recruitment candidates to pass probation and then go on to being promoted within the first year? Like, what is the leading indicators of a high performer? These are the kind of things that you can really start getting into better details on when you really start taking this product mindset.
And looking at Whereby, it's been one thing that has impressed me is the employer brand that you've built and how connected it is to the brand itself. So could you elaborate a bit more about how you went about, in product terms, that would be, I don't know, employee acquisition and marketing, recruitment marketing. So just understanding a bit more about when you joined and how you sort of press play on the initiatives that you had.
You have to commit to the idea that your culture is in a marketplace, which means that you're making decisions about who you are and who you aren't, which means that you can't afford to be a business that just reads a Medium article and then decides to do what Ambi is doing because you like it, unless it makes strategic sense for you, right?
Yeah.
So the first thing that I like to do to really get to that place with my exec team, and I think this goes back to like, if you're a HR leader who's trying to convince your team to do this and they just managed to convince them, like, let's do it. This is one of the first things I think you should do. I call them extremely dry organizational design principles, but I mean, maybe there's a better name. If someone wants to tweet me, I'll take it. But basically what this is like the principles by which like you want your business to be built within this marketplace. Like, who are we? What is the org we're trying to build? What is this company? Are we like a very high leverage business, like a kind of hedge fund trading business where everybody has this huge capacity to influence our revenue? Or are we a very lean business where there's very low hierarchy, so there's very little management promotion opportunities, but people have a huge remit? Is it the opposite? Are you very hierarchical business with lots of management opportunities, but quite a narrow focus from each of your team members? There's all these kind of different ways to think about like, what is the ideal shape and size and kind of structure and what is our org? What kind of company are we actually trying to build here? Because you could be building a Google DeepMind, or you could be building an Amazon, or you could be building an Ambi or a Whereby. But all those things I think honestly should be kind of a different take. So that's the first thing I think you really need to get in place. And once you've got that, it gives you a much clearer direction in terms of how you implement policy and process, compensation principles, recruitment principles, values, everything. Because you're going to have a very different approach if you're building an organization that really focuses on early careers. Facebook is a good example of this. Facebook is very focused on early careers and getting people into the business and growing them internally. That's a really big focus for Meta and Amazon to some degree as well. But that's not something that we really want to do at Whereby, right? So that means that we're not going to invest a lot of time and energy into building a policy and process around the compensation methodology for internships or the approach to hiring, recruiting, and onboarding early careers, because it's just not a strategic focus for us. So I think you're able to take those organizational design principles and start linking them straight into really operational or tactical pieces of HR work. And then you're also able to like really clearly say like when something is just not you, like when something's not a decision you want to make. And one of the things that Whereby has is an important call out here is acknowledging the strengths and the weaknesses of whatever decisions that you've made. So Whereby has decided to be fully distributed. We're very, very autonomous. We have this thing called hours agnosticism, which means it doesn't matter when you work as long as you're output focused. So it's a very high performance culture in terms of like the outputs we expect from our team. But the positives of that are that you have a very flexible work environment. You're very autonomous. If you're driven by performance, it means that you feel incentivized and rewarded for doing a good job. The negatives are it can be extremely isolating, and you really do need to be very good at asking for help when you need it, because people aren't going to come out of the sky and say, do you need a hand, if it's such an autonomous, such a distributed culture. So we've identified very quickly in our recruitment and in our branding that like that's something that we need to make very clear to people. And I think we've gotten better and better at kind of articulating what that looks like in both the way that we talk about our business, but also in the way that we kind of go through our recruitment process as well, to the point where we've had, people do a first round interview with us and then say like, I really love the idea. I love Whereby. I actually kind of love the company, but I just don't think I would be very successful there, honestly. And that's been a good thing for us. We've been like, great, good to know.
It's it would be hopeless or awful for you and the the candidates if that were to be a hire. So that makes perfect sense. And I love how you connect the internal part of this with the external part, like with the employer branding and the communication, because I think a lot of companies are focused on marketing and the pixel perfectness of the ads, rather than understanding that recruitment marketing and employer branding comes from within, and it sort of defines, it's a mirror of the culture and what you're trying to build strategically. So I think this is a very, very valid point. I want to round up with some fire round, Jessica. Are you up for that? Just some quick questions.
Sure.
Perfect. Let's start with the first one. The best part of your job?
Working with my team. I really love my team. They're lovely.
The worst part of your job?
Emails. I get too many emails.
Good answer.
Inbound sales emails.
All right. Your biggest screw up?
Oh God, so many. I can't even list them. I think one of my biggest screw ups is it's such a massive question, but I think probably one of my biggest screw ups in my career that's a helpful thing for people to hear about, not just like some dumb operational thing like, oh, I forgot to send a report to one of our investors or something. I think there was periods in my career where I hadn't been curious and intentional enough about what other functions were doing. Like if I saw something that didn't look quite right, I leaned too far into, I don't want to rock the boat and upset something. Let's just see how it plays out. I think I was a little insecure about how to trust and challenge at the same time, which is something I think I've gotten a lot better at, which meant that I think that there are actually pieces of work that the people team did and then handed over at like our intersection to like finance or operations or sales or whoever manages, and they never really got implemented properly, or they never got, completed in a way that I think was satisfactory, because I was too cautious about being really curious and intentional about what was happening once things went into their team. And I think learning how to be trusting and curious, or trusting and like critical at the same time, is a really important thing to do if you want to be a good business leader. And I don't think I learned it quick enough, but that's just my opinion.
Good answer. Proudest moment? It's
kind of silly, but I am really proud of the book. I'm really proud of the book. It's been a long slog, but I'm the book has been something I like talking about lead up to this. Like when I posted that the book was coming out and that we were at the final the final editing stage and we were getting into pre-orders, I started hearing from all of these companies where people had, unbeknownst to me, read my blog or read something, and they were like, oh, we're doing this. We're trying to do the thing that you're writing this book about. We're really excited about getting the book because we have all these questions about how to do it. And then there was also this secondary moment where actually we had people like Marie Krebs at Learnably, I think, has been a really great advocate for this. She's I think moved on to a new place called Build a Rocket Boy, I think. But they have taken PeopleOps as a product at Learnably, and now they've got People Operations as a product at Build a Rocket Boy. Now Marie is writing her own content about the concept of people operations as a product, and other people learning from that. And this networking effect of people like thinking about this idea and coming up with ideas that I hadn't even thought of. And now I'm like, oh, I should take that. That's a great idea. That for me is such a prideful moment, because it's not just, I've never done this with the intention of being like, oh, look how great my idea is. I've done this because I really do believe that this is like helpful to really smart people that can make everyone's job better by sharing how to work. Anyway, it's a long dumb answer, but hopefully, yeah. I'm just proud of other people.
Obviously, you're getting traction because it's valuable. So we're a big fan and supporter. So last question is, what are the under the radar tactics that your team uses?
I mean, I think it's nothing really under the radar. We're extremely open book. Like I think Whereby is probably one of the most open with how we work teams I've ever worked with.
Yeah. Any pro tips, anything that sort of any aha moments on tactical stuff that you would give as advice to other HR professionals?
This is this is a tip no matter which way you're working. Like give your team a place where you can let them have strategic conversations about what you should be doing as a team, where your job as a leader is just to sit and listen. Like I cannot stress how valuable that is enough, to allow your teams to work through problems and hear how they do that without you yourself feeling like you're the person that needs to run those conversations for them. Give them some tools, give them a question, give them a challenge, give them a problem, and then let them try and work through it with the information that they have and come up with an outcome. Because I really do think that you'll be so surprised by how smart and capable your team are and how much information that they have that you maybe don't know that they have. And they cross across the entire company. They touch everywhere. Anyway, you said short fire question, but that's what I would say is like really give your team a space and just listen to how they solve problems together.
Yeah. Good answer. I'll squeeze one more question at the view. So if you were to recommend people that has inspired you, people that others should follow, who are those people?
So I think Lars Schmidt, who runs Amplify, is a fantastic voice for the HR world. He is so methodical, so organized, so smart, brilliant human. Brandon Chu, who writes a really fantastic product management blog and Substack, I think as well, called Black Box of PM. Mind-blowingly clever person, and so much inspiration has been taken from him about like one of his blog posts, which is called Radical Prioritization. Literally like one of my favorite pieces of writing on the internet. And then there's another chap who is an advisor for Point O Portfolio who his name is Michael Wolf. And he is a brilliant founder, has founded many companies himself, writes a lot about startups and how to build startups, particularly for founders and CEOs. But he has really taken this pivot where he talks a lot about well-being and a lot about how to take care of yourself and build a company sustainably and really be a thoughtful leader. And I think he is such an experienced and like calm and smart voice within the space. He's not the kind of person that goes out and like toots his own horn about all of the great stuff that he's done. He's just an incredibly smart person. So yeah, I want to give a shout out to him as well.
Great shout out. Jessica, I think time is up. Thank you so much for staying with us for the first episode of The Rant, a great podcast in the making. So really appreciate your time and all the best with the
Thank you.
People should order it. We'll put out the link and have a great
I'm
day.
excited to hear what you think. I'm nervous.
Yeah.
I'm nervous about it.
I'll give you clear feedback. No worry about that. I'm sure it will be great. So thank you so much. Great ideas and insightful thoughts here.
Thanks.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.